Welcome to Antarctica, the highest, driest, coldest, windiest, most remote and inhospitable place on Earth. With that in mind, in January of 2005, as was alluded to in my introduction, I made a decision to run a marathon on an ice shelf located 600 miles from the South Pole. Keep in mind, nobody at this point in time had ever thought of this or tried this. This marathon was only the second of my life. The first and only one was 20 years prior, when I was a college student in Boulder, Colorado. A year later, I returned to run what they called the ultra marathon, 100 kilometers. At the time, I did not know how far 100 kilometers was. True story. Now, you're asking yourself the question, why? It had very little to do with sports, cold weather, or insanity. But rather, it had everything to do with this book. I was on a business trip in Bakersfield, California, of all places. This was in August of 2001. I was teaching a leadership course that my company commissioned me to teach. I ran into this story by random chance. It was a story of a guy named Ernest Shackleton, whom I had never heard of. Within 3 minutes, I had the overview of the story figured out. This guy, in 1914, hired 27 people with one goal: that the 28 men would sail to Antarctica, and a small group of the 28 would try to do something nobody had ever thought of or had ever tried, which was to cross the entire continent on foot, 1,800 miles. I'm thinking to myself, how come I don't work for somebody like this? I literally transposed my boss's face onto the story, what little I knew of it. Because I'm the type of person who's very attracted to doing things that are different. And some employees are. And I'm thinking to myself, what kind of leader, especially as somebody coming from the recruiting business, I'm thinking, I get one guy wants to do this. How do you get 27 other people to say voluntarily, I'll do this? So, of course, I bought the book. Then I bought another one and another one. I went a little bit crazy with it. And I ended up rewriting my company's course using this story. And I'll give you the overview of the story. The 28 men, after sailing down nearly 12,000 miles from England, just 20 miles short of their goal, the boat got stuck. Eventually, it succumbed to the pressure of the ice. And they lived on ice floes for 2 years. All 28 people came home alive. And I thought to myself, how do you lead a group of people to voluntarily and willingly continue to physically, emotionally, and mentally move forward despite these circumstances being dire at best? And that was the premise for the course that I wrote. There are about 6 or 8 solid takeaways in this story that address the subject of how do I find, engage, and keep better employees. That's where a lot of my speaking engagements are in corporate settings, because one of the biggest challenges corporations have is how do I get my people to want to show up earlier, want to stay later, and want to go all in. Statistically speaking, about 30% of our workforce is fully engaged on a consistent basis. That's not good. Shackleton's story has an awful lot to address on that subject. I'm going to give you one of the takeaways for today. Now, at one point in time, after the boat had gotten stuck and then it was crushed, they were living on the ice floes. And Shackleton knew our goal now is not to cross the continent, it's to get everybody home alive. But to do that, they had to make some very difficult decisions. Decisions they didn't want to make. So Shackleton then at one point in time looked at these guys. There were 69 dogs brought on this trip for more than one reason. 4 puppies were born on that ship during their time down there. And you know where the story's going. During the next 5 weeks, Shackleton ordered that all the dogs had to be put down. Now listen, I know that you don't like hearing this as much as I don't like telling you. All right, I'll admit it, I'm one of these people who loves their pets way too much. I know Chris does. Anybody else love their pets too much? There's always a few, okay? These are mine. On the left is Shackleton, and on the right is Yosemite. I love my cats more than I like most people. Can any of you relate? Of course you can. I called them on FaceTime last night. That's how I am, okay? But here's the point. In the real world, people have to make decisions they don't want to make, that are in the best interest of whoever's in the picture. Whether it's a work setting, think about the decisions we have to make in our marriages that we don't want to make, decisions in raising our kids, decisions that those 10-year-old kids today have to make on their feet in real time. These are not easy decisions. Shackleton gives us a standard by which we can live. Now, this is why I went to Antarctica, to follow in the footsteps of my hero. Because somebody told me a long time ago, look, if you want to go out and take this course that you developed for your company to the real world, you got to go. So I signed up for this marathon. Now, of course, I live in San Diego. 50 degrees is as cold as it gets. And my wife is not open to relocating in International Falls, Minnesota, Regina, Saskatchewan, my favorite place in North America, or Oymyakon, Russia, the coldest inhabited town on earth. Angela's not going. So I literally talked my way into a commercial cold storage facility. Now, the challenging part of the freezer is not the fact that it's minus 22 It's 59 feet wide. 59 feet is all I had from one frozen metal wall to the other, back and forth, back and forth. And I'm thinking to myself, this is really difficult, mentally and physically. And then I had a flashback to 1976. My old hockey coach in Allentown, Pennsylvania, on a Thursday night hockey practice said this, Mike, you'll play the game the way you practice. If you choose to make the practice harder, the game goes easier. He skated away. Little did I know that 15-second encounter would be 15 of the most important seconds of my life. Because now Ed's teaching me. I can choose how to look at difficulty. It's a relative word. And I thought to myself, I'm going to look at the difficulty in the freezer differently. And I did. I saw it as an ally, not as an enemy. And I ended up actually running a marathon inside the freezer before I showed up in Antarctica. 26.2 miles in a 59-foot frozen space. It sounds insane. I understand that. It took 8.5 hours. But I know it worked. Because when I finished the marathon in Antarctica, which took 7 hours and 15 minutes, Mike's instinctive thought was, that only seemed like 7 minutes. 7 minutes seemed like, or 7 hours seemed like 7 minutes, because I changed the definition of difficulty. And all of us go through difficulty. The question is how do we define it? Because how we define it is proportional to how we will progress through it. And the good news is we can change the definition of difficulty because it's a relative word. I just had to condition the muscles in my mind. Now let me give you a practical application of this. I went to school in Boulder, Colorado. I defected. I told my mom Burlington, Vermont was too close to Allentown. It was an 8-hour car ride. So if the kids tell you that someday, let them go. They'll be fine. They're going to go anyway. So I went to Boulder. And the question I asked all my climbing friends was, did you ever fall? What do you think they say? It's an emphatic yes, especially as we're learning to go up things that are steeper and more difficult. We make mistakes, we fall. But the good news is they make something called a rope and a harness. Look, it's really not complicated. You fall 5 or 10 feet, you learn a lesson, you move on. It's not life-threatening or life-changing. Now think metaphorically about all the mountains that all of us and the people in our organizations every day stumble and fall from. There's a million of them. Marital mountains, child mountains, aging parent mountains, sick and dying pet mountains, fickle customer mountains, compliance mountains. I mean, the list is endless. Now, the good news is most of the mountains that we stumble and fall from are 5 or 10 feet, metaphorically speaking. We make a mistake, we learn a lesson, a rope catches us, and we move on. Some of the mountains, though, are bigger and more threatening. They're life-changing, like this one. This was a story from 1985 in a place called Durango, Colorado. An 18-year-old college freshman falls 125 feet in a free fall and lives to tell the story. Now, the recovery reminded me of this. Because you see, after 6 months of being in the hospital, she got out. And she had a fairly normal life. She graduated from college, she got married, so she had a fairly normal life. But that was only the start of her difficulty. Because subsequent to the release of the hospital, she discovered at age 30, she got hepatitis C in a blood transfusion, which led to kidney failure, which led to dialysis, which led to all kinds of things. Her difficulties only started after she got out of that hospital. Then she discovered along the way that as a child, she had been abused really severely. She had sort of tucked that away in her mind. But this accident sort of brought that to her forefront of her thinking, which is a whole different set of difficulties. And in their marriage, it was really a struggle. This couple's been in the hospital more than they've been on vacation. She's told me stories where her husband's standing there. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. She's unconscious in the bed. The blood pressure goes to 250 over 230. For those of you that know blood pressure numbers, you know what I'm talking about. The blue light behind the bed goes beep, beep. And her husband's thinking, I hope she makes it. This is my first and only girlfriend of my life. I hope she makes it. At the same time, he's thinking, I hope she doesn't make it, because I can't live with this. You talk about difficult. When you're standing there looking at somebody you care about and you're thinking, I hope they make it and I hope they don't. That's awkward. The reason I can tell you the story from Durango with such conviction, the person that fell off that mountain in 1985 is my wife, Angela. We've been married for almost 30 years, and people ask me all the time, why does it have to be 50 below zero and bottom of the world and everything so extreme? It's not sports, cold weather, or insanity. Well, it's a little insanity, I'll give you that, okay? For me, it's just my way of redefining and recalibrating what difficulty is and what it isn't, but using that for things in life that count. My name is Antarctic Mike. Thank you for your time. I look forward to bringing my stories and lessons to some of your people.
Round of applause for Antarctic Mike.